Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Be sure to check out the Green Building Matters community, where you can have unlimited exam prep for any of the professional credential exams you're tackling next, as well as putting your continuing education on autopilot, saving time with GBS reporting your hours on your behalf. Check it out, gbes.com/join. Now, enjoy this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I appreciate you listening each week, where I normally interview a green building professional somewhere in the world. And today from Vancouver, British Columbia, we've got Brenda Martens, and she's the Director of Research and Collaboration at Lighthouse. Can't wait to get into Brenda's story. Brenda, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on your podcast, Charlie.
Oh, I can't wait to talk more about not just how you became a LEED fellow and all that experience along the way, but just, kind of where you got your start. So where did you grow up and go to school?
I grew up in British Columbia. It was in a small town in the interior in Summerland. From there, I went to the University of British Columbia, which is here in Vancouver. It was a bit of a culture shock going from a town whose population was about 1/10 of the daytime population of the university that I was going to.
Wow.
So that took a bit of adjustment. I didn't even actually know how to ride on a bus since we had no bus system in the town I grew up. So that was one of the things that I had to actually figure out when I got here.
Wow, that's a good story. And, I always like to follow up. Just tell us about, in schooling at the time, and eventually, you got into, architecture and then green buildings. But, was sustainability part of the curriculum, or how'd you kind of get turned on to the sustainability movement?
Right. That happened pretty late in my career. My degree is actually unrelated. It's in physics. And then I went into a drafting program at one of the local colleges and got my certificate in drafting. And that's when I started in the industry.
Gotcha. And that was maybe early 90s now. It says electrical drafting. Was that more on commercial buildings and really one-line diagrams? Or help me understand there, where was your focus at the time?
It was on commercial buildings. So I have never worked in the single-family residential market. It's always been either institutional or commercial or industrial. So my first job was a government job for the Workers' Compensation Board, and I was in their facilities department there.
Fantastic. And you kind of stayed in that region. Now, you were saying it was later in your career, but did anyone, really kind of nudge you with sustainability and green buildings? Did you have an aha moment that you wanted to make a career change? Like, when did that happen?
Right. It was externally driven, Charlie. I actually moved on from the Workers' Compensation Board to a private architectural firm as a project manager. And we had a government client, the government of BC, who wanted to have their Vancouver office be a showcase of sustainability. Yeah, so that was my first exposure to it, and it was at the client's request. So I began researching materials, sustainable materials, recycled content, locally available, all of that good stuff that you see in LEED and other rating systems out there. And that was when I had my first epiphany that we didn't have to do business as usual. There was a lot of other alternatives out there. And the connection was even a little bit stronger because coming from the Workers' Compensation Board, the function of that entity is to compensate workers who have been injured or workplace disease. And in the construction industry, about twice as many people die of workplace disease than they do from all accidents combined. Yeah, electrocutions, things falling on you, vehicle accidents, workplace disease, which is caused by exposure to toxins, the deaths from that more than doubled the accidental deaths.
Do you think we're making progress there with healthier, not just buildings people will be in, but even during the construction? Have we been forced to do better?
We have been in a lot of ways. LEED and other systems brought awareness to this. So the low VOC materials, those aren't just good for the occupants of the building. They're good or better for the people that are constructing them.
No, you're absolutely right. And so along the way, was there anyone that maybe was a mentor, anyone that you really followed, maybe was an influencer that opened some doors for you?
Ray Anderson of Interface was actually one of my heroes.
Awesome. And
through connections in the industry here, the Interface representative, I was able to meet him on more than one occasion. And in the meeting of him, he was such a nice man and such a gentleman. He embodied that essence of let's do this because it's a good thing to do. We'll be profitable doing it. And unlike a lot of other people, he didn't criticize other systems or other ideas. He was just so willing to work with anybody who wanted to do the right thing.
Amazing. Yeah. I went to Georgia Tech and so did Ray, and he's done so much on that side of things. And not just in the industry, you just nailed it. It just carries over. What else do you do? And so, you went with architecture and then, fill in a little more of the career line there. And you're a LEED fellow, which is amazing. So congratulations on that high mark. What did that mean for you on the LEED fellow side?
The LEED fellow, that was a milestone for sure. It basically, I think, arose because I was able to get into the movement earlier than most. And that was through the opportunity afforded to me by doing those sustainable projects for the architectural firm that I was in. So in that same firm, I did my first LEED certification of the Surrey Transfer Station. And at the time, that was one of maybe 8 buildings in the country, in Canada, to certify. So even though I only had one certification, it stood out. I was a leader in the field at that point, right? And I joined the Cascadia Green Building Council as a volunteer on their technical committee. And again, wouldn't have been able to do that without that one certification under my belt. And from there, the projects, they just got better. The Olympic Village, the 2010 Olympic Games were held here in Vancouver. So I was one of the sustainability consultants on that project. And that was over 1 million square feet of space that was LEED Gold and Platinum certified and an international project.
Early high levels of LEED. That's amazing. Can you help me with something? Everyone that listens to the podcast, I want them to know that it's so important to volunteer with your trade organizations, or in this case, you were there with Cascadia Green Building Council, and we can talk a little bit, Brenda, how maybe that differs than the U.S. Green Building Council. But it sounds like you've gotten a lot out of being a part of your trade organization there. Can you talk a little more about that?
So having joined that technical group, I also volunteered for the education committee of our local branch of the U.S. Green Building Council. And at that time, actually, Cascadia is our local chapter, and it covered Washington, Oregon, and BC. And so it was an international chapter that crossed borders. And through volunteering on the education committee, I was later elected to the board of Cascadia. And while on the board, had the opportunity to hire Jason McLennan as the CEO of the organization. And I'm sure you're familiar with Jason McLennan.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic work. And sounds like you might have been there around the time of Marnie Evans, who was recently on the podcast, too.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool club.
That's correct.
All of you really, brought in the right person, and gosh, the rest is history kind of thing on the living building front. That's so cool.
That's right. So Jason had drafted up the Living Building Challenge, and it was released through Cascadia. And so that was another huge milestone. because now you're not just having an influence on your own projects, you're able to influence the industry, basically.
So cool. And for those that don't know, I mean, the U.S. Green Building Council does have different chapters, different locations, but yeah, Cascadia was just, it continues to be, way out in front. So that's great. Thanks for that. Because I really am a fan of getting with your trade organizations, getting on those committees and helping steer, not working. So let's talk about some projects. You mentioned, the Olympic projects you were on, but what other projects along the way have you been exposed to? Your, really exciting some projects.
Right. So I was fortunate enough to actually work on a Living Building Challenge project in the Okanagan. That's a valley that crosses through the center of BC into Washington State, a very arid, desert-like area. And so the college there was putting up a trade building, and they wanted it to teach the next generation of trades how to work on sustainable buildings. And they wanted it to be Living Building Challenge certified. So the targets on that were quite impressive, with net zero energy, net zero water, zero waste. So that was an exciting project to work on. A lot of interesting technologies used and a lot of different strategies like thermal chimneys that you won't see on many projects. So just the exposure to that sort of high level of goals brought out the best in the project team, the creativity and the innovation.
Oh, that's so cool. What else are you really proud of along the way? Because, I know it's not just been the buildings and the certifications, but, as I understand it, you really like to write and do some training and education. So what else is on the highlight reel there, Brenda?
I do teach green building and sustainability here in Vancouver and have taught workshops across Canada for the Canada Green Building Council. And the leverage when you, again, teach a workshop or a class, you're enabling each of those participants to go out and do better work on each of their projects. So it's just so much more impactful than individual project work, although it all has its place. You can't teach if you don't actually work on projects. So it's part of a continuum. But to see students that have succeeded in their careers and to see them having been influenced towards sustainability, that's quite rewarding experience. It gives you hope.
It gives you hope. You're right. It gives you hope. And just that passion, right? With college students, just, really the change can be made and we're on the right track. Mm-hmm. Just, I'm sure it's inspiring for you, and you've been doing this a little while. So, tell us a little more about what you're doing today and with the Lighthouse and your Sustainable Building Center. What's your focus there? So
I joined Lighthouse a year ago, just a little over a year ago. And the focus of Lighthouse is on sustainable building as well as zero waste and circular economy. I found that quite interesting because I thought that there was a lot of potential in the intersection between those. So bringing a circular economy to the construction industry. We are trying to realize that. And in the interim, I've become a true advisor. So I promised myself I wouldn't do any more accreditations. But
yeah, just one more, that online test at least. But that's a great credential to have. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, it's administered by the GBCI, same organization that certifies and accredits for LEED. And so it's a very familiar feeling standard, but its focus, of course, is zero waste, with the prevention of waste being the highest goal there, right? So it's not about recycling or composting per se. It's about not creating anything that needs to be recycled or composted or go to the landfill. So I'm really quite excited about the zero waste and how that can be incorporated into the construction industry.
Oh, absolutely. Let's unpack that for a minute. So once we're up and running, maybe we do need better products. Maybe they're compostable, reusable. And, can you give us one pro tip on the kind of consumer side, the circular economy side? What are you seeing some trends on, or what are you passionate about on that side of things?
In my personal life, it's the elimination of single-use anything. So that's the big thing I see, that it's a culture of convenience And we've let that determine our consumer choices to a great degree. And if we continue doing that, that's just a road to disaster. So yes, I'm on a crusade to eliminate single-use items.
Fantastic. And now how about the construction sites? Actually, I got my start coming out of Georgia Tech. I worked with a hard bid general contractor, so I definitely really love and understand that world. But yeah, how can we do better with our construction sites? Maybe not just green them up, but LEED might reward us for 50 or 75% diversion. But what are we missing on the construction sites?
The design for disassembly and reuse is not strong. Right? So making sure that when we design a building, we plan for its end of life. And that's going to be an interesting challenge, because how do you communicate to people 50 to 75 years from now what you intended for the building you've just constructed, how you intended it to be disassembled, what they can do with the products? Like, will they even use the same products? So it's a very interesting question. How do you design for a building's end of life? And I think we need to do a better job of answering it.
I love it. I was fortunate enough last year to go to Qatar, to go to Doha, where they're building all the new soccer stadiums. And luckily, they are building them to be disassembled. And so I'm happy to hear that they're not going to just be abandoned after a big Olympics or a World Cup. So where is the incentive for a developer to do that? If it's not baked into LEED or some other popular programs, is it just the ethical side of it? Hey, this is a better way to do it, and you need to do it for the future? Or is there any incentive to make sure we're building this way?
Right. The way I would look at it is, what's the disincentive? It conceivably doesn't need to cost any more than it would to design business as usual. It's just more thought given to what happens to the building at the end of life. So why wouldn't you do that? It was preventing us from doing that.
I like what you did there. And so hopefully everybody's paying attention is you're right. It's not always about the reward. It's like, look, this is the best way to do it. It doesn't have to be an additional cost. So that's really cool. Well, it's a good segue to, Brenda, let's pretend you had a crystal ball. Where do you think this green building movement or sustainability is shifting next? What should we be reading up on?
That's a great question, Charlie. And I wish I had the answer to that. I see a proliferation of different standards and rating systems. Some of them, like the Living Building Challenge and LEED, are holistic, and some of them are more concentrated on just a portion of the characteristics of buildings, like energy performance with Passive House and net zero certification, human health with the WELL building standard. There's accessibility standards. There's resilience standards. So each of these different standards are measuring some sort of metric of a building. And the trend that I'm seeing here is to look at energy standards and wellness standards, combine those in a project. So carbon being the number one issue climate-wise and often politically. That's important, and people are looking for certifications in that. But then there's the counter of, well, if you're not designing buildings to be healthy for human beings, then haven't we missed the point? So that's also strong. But doing that misses out on a lot of other things, like water savings. What are we doing to the site? What are we doing to ecology? So I'm hoping that that trend doesn't continue and that we go back to a more holistic view of buildings. And I'm not quite sure if that will be renewed interest in these whole building certifications or holistic building certifications, or if it will not involve certifications. It's hard to say.
It is hard to say because, sometimes a program like LEED, it just makes our job easier when we really can bring some extra points, some extra credit. It's like, look, we know we need to do it, but look, it really helps here, here, and here. But we can't wait on all the rating systems either. But thanks for that peek into the future. I agree with you. But, Brenda, amazing career here. What do you think your specialty is or your gift? What are you best at?
Right. So my superpower is the ability to recognize good ideas. And of course, this doesn't apply to my own ideas, but I do have the ability to recognize good ideas when I see them. And I thought this was universal until I realized that it wasn't. Otherwise, like every business case would be a successful one. You wouldn't start and fail a company because every idea you'd be able to recognize whether it was good or not. But so along the way in my career, I've been able to recognize a few key good ideas when I saw them, and that has helped me greatly.
Wow, that is a great superpower. One of my favorite entrepreneurs, I'm not sure if you're familiar, is here in Atlanta where I am, Sarah Blakely, first female self-made billionaire here in Atlanta. And she's just fantastic. I heard her speak and she said an idea is most vulnerable in its infancy, right? So when someone has that original thought, that original idea, if someone shoots it down too quickly, you bury it, you make it go away. But it sounds like you're an encourager when there is a really good idea. Help someone take it further along. So that's really neat. Yes,
I do try, and I'll have to look her up.
Sarah Blakely, fantastic. Yeah. So let's get into some pro tips here. What routines or rituals do you have? Obviously, you continue to lessen your carbon footprint personally, which is amazing. Get a lead by example. But what else? What helps you stay on point? Any rituals that you do?
I don't have so much rituals and routines as I have a few rules that I work by. Okay. One of them being to work where you are. So make change where you are. You can leave the work in other places for other people in those places. And really to help whoever you can along the way. I have never gone wrong with that rule. And I do think that cooperation is the new competition. If I've broken that rule, I have regretted it. So it is another one of the rules that I try to live by.
That's really neat. I'm really enjoying the conversation here. I want to unpack more of those good habits you have and those rules you live by because I really like those. I'm a fan of the bucket list. As we get to know each other, Brenda, I don't know if there's anything maybe on your bucket list, any travel, adventure, maybe a book, another book. What's on the bucket list? What are one or two things?
So there's some travel on the bucket list. One of the things I would like to do, and this is a recent add to my bucket list, is to see a butterfly migration. I've seen images and video of it, and it looks quite beautiful, and I'd like to see that. In terms of travel, I don't fly unless it's absolutely necessary. In 2013, I wanted to go to the World Masters Games. That was in Torino, Italy, but not flying. It's kind of hard to get to Europe. But one of the things that a person should do is not think of sustainability as a sacrifice. Like I didn't give up wanting or trying to go to the Masters Games. I thought, how do you do that if you don't fly? And so the option was to take a freighter across the Atlantic. So that's what I did. And it was quite the adventure, right? Like that was a trip that not many people are able to make, and you get exposed to a lot of different things.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. You got to have a mindset shift. I can tell working with you, that must be something you help people see is not what's the incentive, what's the disincentive. You were quick with that. And here you are with the freighter, right. Whole new adventure.
Exactly. You look at it as an opportunity, not a hardship. But that wasn't my bucket list. My bucket list includes flying on an electric plane. So I would like to take a flight on the first electric plane, commercial electric plane.
Coming soon, hopefully. I love it. Well, what are a couple of those travel destinations, though? Give us a peek where you might travel to one day.
Iceland looks like it's an interesting place to go, and I think it should be on everyone's bucket list as soon as it becomes sustainable to get there.
Wonderful. I've not been. My son just did a research project on Iceland, so we did learn a lot about it.
Actually, Alaska and Yukon would also be, I've been to both, and I would return to those locations.
Okay. Well, there we heard it. Yeah, tell me about books. Do you like to listen to books or pick up a good book, a hard copy? And do you have a couple of books you'd recommend?
I have at least one, and I've started a habit of getting both the hard copy and the audio book.
Oh, okay.
So if there, I'll listen, and then if there's something that catches my attention, I'll read that portion of the book. Just because I find the audio so fleeting that I'm afraid I won't remember it. But if I go back and read the book, then hopefully I will. And the book that I would recommend doesn't have anything to do with sustainability directly. It's Difficult Conversations. It came out of the Harvard School for Business, and it's about how to discuss topics that aren't easy to talk about. And I think it's important because of the discussion around climate change. I think we have to bring everyone along, and how we do that is important. And if we paint ourselves as heroes, that's going to make other people villains, and they're not going to come along for the change. But if we don't, if we listen to them and we talk to them with a real interest in understanding how they view the world, then we have a chance.
I love it. Difficult Conversations. We'll put that link down in the show notes. That's a great recommendation. Thank you. And you're right. You can apply it personally. You can apply it at business, or in these discussions, we have to stop being divisive and just have conversations.
That's right.
Okay. Let's talk about two-part question. One is there anything you wish you'd have known a little earlier in your green building career, or just career in general?
There is. So while I was working at the Workers' Compensation Board, I just accepted the status quo because I really didn't understand that there was any alternatives. So I wish I had known earlier that there were options other than what we were doing that were less harmful to construction workers and the population at large. So that's one thing that I would suggest, is that people not just accept the status quo, that we always be looking for a better way to do things.
That's fantastic. In closing, is there any words of encouragement? Because a lot of the listeners here on the Green Building Matters podcast, they're either making a career change or they're just jumping into this green building movement. And I mentioned to you, some have maybe been doing it for 15, 20 years. We got a good mix of listeners, but just any words of encouragement for someone jumping into this movement.
Great. So I was at least 10 years into my career before I even got wind of sustainability in the construction industry. So it is never too late to make a career change or change your path or direction towards sustainability. And I really do think that we need to believe that we can make that change. Just the very fact of believing it makes it that much more likely to happen. If you're just working at it, but you don't think that you'll be able to actually change anything, you think that we're doomed, then more than likely we will be. But if we believe that we can do this, then we can do it.
Love it. That is fantastic advice to end on. You've challenged me with a couple of quick mindset shifts, and I just want to say congrats on your awesome green building career and the work you're doing now at Lighthouse. And just want to say thank you for being on the podcast, Brenda.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Charlie, and I admire the work that you're doing as well.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At GBES.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.